My mother put her music on while we were clearing the table, and in the middle of it, she put a hand on my arm and said, "Stop for a minute and listen to this. Listen to the words, Hannah, and then try to tell me we don't just keep reliving the same feelings and problems as the people before us over and over and over." "What is it?" I said, leaning back against the counter. Janis Joplin singing "A Woman Left Lonely," she said softly, turning it up and leaning next to me. "Tell me this isn't timeless." And I listened, and I heard the raggedy pain and raw yearning and bewilderment, heard the question and wanted to hear the answer too, but the only one seemed to be neglect by a man that made my heart as heavy as a brick. I just shook my head and went back to clearing the table because I couldn't stand thinking that how bad I felt and lonely I felt with Seth sometimes was not only timeless, but common. Crystal's brother's keg party would have been better if I hadn't gotten the bright idea to bring Seth too and introduce him to Crystal and have him meet my other friends. Bad idea. He stiffened up the minute he saw all the guys with long hair and tats in the clearing, got a chip on his shoulder a mile wide, and partied so hard there was no way I could let him drive home, which peed him off, so he started getting crappy with me in front of everyone there and only stopped when Crystal, wearing hard eyes and a hard smile, quietly reminded him that everyone here was my friend, not his, and he was making an a-hole out of himself. He went over and sat down out loud, smoking and sulking and glaring until I told Crystal we were just going to go. "How?" she said. "He can't drive." "I don't know," I said, because there's no way I would take him back to my house like that. So we just took him back to Crystal's. She made him coffee, and I knew what she was thinking, but she never said it out loud, and she stayed while we poured a whole pot of coffee into him. I told her to go back to the party because I was going to walk him around until he seemed half decent, so she did. I took him outside and made him walk with me, first with my arm around him, then just next to me because he pushed me away and snapped, "I can do it." So I was like, "Fine, then do it," because I was so mad at myself for bringing him there in the first place. "You think you know me, but you don't," he said, swaying and giving me a look full of disgust. "You don't know crap, so why don't you just get the H away from me?" "Why are you saying that?" I said, starting to cry. "What did I ever do to you?" He blinked hard, focused on me, and sniffed. "Right, go ahead, cry. That's all girls ever do. Cry and lie and get out of it. You're all the same." He turned, fumbling with his fly, and stumbled over to the bushes on the side of Crystal's house. That's when I heard a bike rumble up. It was Jesse. "Hey, Hannah, long time no see," he said with an easy smile, climbing off the bike and hanging the helmet. "You headed down to the party or what?" "Actually, just leaving," I said, glancing around to make sure Seth wasn't lurching out toward me. Because if there was one thing I didn't want, it was, "Hey, how are you doing?" Jesse said, his gaze shifting to somewhere behind me. "Sup," Seth said, reeling up and slinging an arm around my neck. I met Jesse's gaze, calm and dark and slightly amused, and just wanted to die because he recognized Seth from the mall. I knew he did, and I felt like a fool. "So, how's work?" I said desperately, dragging my hair from under Seth's arm and wincing. "In this economy, I'm just glad for the steady paycheck." He tucked his hair behind his ear and cocked his head, eyes twinkling. "So how's school? Did you graduate yet?" "No," I said, silently begging him not to go any further, and he must have caught my plea because he just smiled and said, "Well, hey, I have to get down to the party," and so to Seth. "Good seeing you again, buddy," and ambled away, whistling. "So, did you ever F him?" Seth said, loud enough for him to hear. Jesse stiffened, paused, and turned, all traces of good humor wiped away from his face. I caught my breath and managed a furious no to Seth, and after a second Jesse kept going, and then I struggled out from under Seth's arm and said, "What is wrong with you? Why did you say that?" "Because he wants to F you," he said, lifting his chin and giving me a cold look. I looked away, arms wrapped around my waist, and I couldn't help it. I started to cry again. "Why are you being like this? Tell me I'm wrong," he demanded. "You're wrong," I said, avoiding his gaze. "Bullcrap," he said. "Were you ever with him?" "What are you talking about?" I cried. "This is a party, and he said hi. So what? Big deal." "Were you?" he said. And what I wanted to say was, yes, I was. "There, are you happy now?" But I didn't, because that would have made him even madder, and I was already humiliated, and all I wanted to do was walk away, leave him there, not forever, but for now. But I couldn't do that, because if I did, I knew he would never come back. He could do that. He could close himself down and turn it all off, and one stupid fight wasn't worth losing him over. So I didn't say anything, just stood there huddled and sniffling and wiping my eyes. Finally he sighed and said quietly, "Come here," and I did, and he held me, and he was sorry, but he didn't like seeing me so friendly with so many scummy bikers. "They're not scummy, they're my friends," I mumbled against his tear-soaked shirt. "Yeah, well, I'm your boyfriend," he said, holding me tighter. "Unless you don't want me anymore." "Of course I do," I said, crying harder because I was scared. "Don't even say that." "Well, what am I supposed to think, Hannah?" he said, pulling back and making me look at him. "You're choosing them over me." "I never said that," I said, hiccuping. "But Crystal's my best friend." "I thought I was your best friend," he said, sounding hurt. It just got worse from there for another minute until I was really sobbing and saying, fine, I wouldn't come down to any more parties at Crystal's unless he was with me. And he hugged me, and we walked some more, and he finally got sober enough to drop me off back at my house. I was worried about him driving home, but he said he'd be fine, and except for running over somebody's big plastic recycling bucket and dragging it for a mile before it finally shattered and broke free. Grant is getting too skinny. I think it's because she can't eat anything anymore but mushed up food and because she chokes easily. Grandpa said if the food goes down the wrong pipe and ends up in her lungs, then it'll breed bacteria and she'll get pneumonia and probably die, so we have to be very, very careful about feeding her. Plus, she never stops moving, and that has to burn calories because she's always sweating, too. And I swear to God, she looks so exhausted that I feel like tying her arms down or something just to give her a break. The thing is, she'd still strain and twitch and jerk, only she'd probably end up with hideous rope burns, too. And that would make me an old person abuser, so forget it. I don't want to hurt her ever. How it ends. I took a deep breath and, juggling the breakfast tray, opened the door to Miss Bame's room. Hello? I was wondering when you would make an appearance, said a soft voice from somewhere among a pile of pillows on the bed. Come in, please. I have your breakfast, I said, and sidled into the shadowy room, trying not to spill the glass of grapefruit juice and cup of hot tea on the tray. Another egg, the voice said with a tinge of disgust. I wasn't sure what to do with it, and stood there until she said, Well, bring it here, please, and open the shades. I'd like to see who I'm talking to. I did, settling down the tray and then going around the room, pulling the shades. When I was done, I turned and got my first real look at Margaret Bame and the sick room. It was a woman's room, an elegant, magnificent private garden. The beige carpet was over a cherry floor and was patterned with pink roses, violets, and blue forget-me-nots. The wallpaper was cabbage roses against a baby blue background with deeper blue morning glory vines twining throughout. The ceiling was high, the chandelier crystals twinkling in the thin February sunlight, the furniture a rich glossy mahogany. There were old bisque dolls and lace scarves on the bureaus, and the vanity was covered with cosmetics and an elegant rainbow of perfume bottles and stoppers. The vanity stool was pleated satin, with clawed ball feet, and the bedside lamp was pink with beaded glass fringe. The bed was a double like one my mother and I had shared, only instead of having room for two, one side was piled with novels and magazines, an ice pack, a hand mirror, and a brush, and a pile of white sheets waiting for a decorative embroidery. What struck me hardest at that moment was how everything in the room seemed to be flourishing, except the woman supported by the mountain of flowered pillows, a small, pale, shrunken figure whose bony shoulders seemed too slight to support even the lacy straps of her nightgown. She gazed back at me, her blue eyes rimmed with dark hollows and braided ash-brown hair, slightly mussed from sleep. Bruises dappled the crooks of her arms, and the skin at her throat looked withered. So you're the strapping young orphan come to distract me from my misery, she said, taking in my hand-me-down woolen skirt and the white blouse, straining slightly at the buttons. Sighing, she picked up her fork and toyed with the runny, soft-boiled egg. I have no appetite for this. She tasted the tea and set the cup down with a faint grimace. Chamomile cannot hold a candle to Earl Grey, especially without sugar. Dreadful. I waited, not knowing what to say. She nibbled the buttered centers of her toast and sipped her grapefruit juice, shuddering with each swallow, then asked me to help her to the bathroom. I did, sliding a supporting arm around her hot, trembling frame as we crept across the carpet and then waiting outside the door while she completed her toilet. I helped her back into bed, where she lay back, pale and sweating, closed her eyes, and didn't speak again. For the next week, this became our morning routine. Lunch and dinner, however, were very different stories. By noon, her pain had eased some thanks to her medication, and she was relaxed, awake, and lonely enough to want to talk. She didn't require anything from me at first, speaking generally about the approaching spring and how the long, dark months of winter always seemed so ominous. She showed me some of the books on the bed, the novels she'd bought years ago that were now helping pass the hours. Talk to me, Louise, she said one afternoon, smiling slightly at my surprised look. For this moment, at least, I've grown tired of hearing my own voice. She eased herself up against the pillows, wincing, pulled her long braid out from behind her, and laid it over her shoulder. My forehead aches so from the weight of the braid, but I can't seem to convince Nurse that the pain is real. She believes I only complain for attention. Would you like me to brush out your hair? I heard myself offer. I used to do it for my mother, and she always said it was very soothing. She gazed at me for a moment, as if searching for something, and finally nodded. That would be nice. Yes, please. I moved a wooden chair with tapestry seat over to the window, and then helped her out of bed, into her robe, and over to the chair. Are you all right? Yes, she said, breathlessly wincing. I'm just sore. I waited until she was settled, then untied the blue ribbon from the end of the braid and spread the clumsy weave. When I was finished, her hair hung to her waist. Oh, that's lovely, she murmured as I brushed. I don't know how anyone can choose to avoid human contact. I find myself hungering for it constantly. And of all that's out of reach for me now, I believe being touched is what I miss the most. She leaned forward to peer out the window. Look at all the snow still on the ground. It feels like winter never ended. And I did so want to see one more spring. My hand jerked and the brush grazed her scalp. "Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Bame. Of course you'll see spring. My goodness, why would you even say something like that?" She never answered, only gazed out the window and at the workshop until she could no longer sit comfortably, and then I helped her back to bed and pulled the shade so she could sleep. "I've hired a new handyman," Dr. Bames said that afternoon in passing. "Don't let me catch you fraternizing with him, Louise." I stopped open-mouthed and gazed at his retiring figure. He was listening slightly, and his hair, normally so thick and neat, seemed sparser and almost moth-eaten. I sniffed the air, but there was no alcohol scent, only the faint smell of chemicals and rotting meat. I did Miss Bame's hair every day after lunch. If she felt strong enough, she would sit in the chair by the window. If not, she would shift slightly and lean forward just enough for me to angle around behind her. Sometimes she sang old songs like "I'll Never Smile Again" or "Only Forever." Her voice is soft, wistful, almost a whisper, and on those days I would brush as gently as I could while her gaze followed the path Dr. Bame's footsteps had made from the house to the workshop and back. Dr. Bames shot a doe and dragged her straight to his workshop, although afterward he said he plugged her orifices with rags to prevent her bodily fluids from leaking out and staining her hair. I could still see the blood trail, scarlet-black smears against the snow, beginning at the tree line, where she'd come for the salt lick and had taken the shot in the abdomen, gone down thrashing and convulsing, finally died with an ending at the workshop door a scant 100 yards away. One afternoon when the fresh snow was falling and Miss Bame thought the sky too bleak to look at, she said, "How old are you, Louise?" "I'm 15, I said. "15, she murmured. "Would it surprise you to know that I would give anything to be you?" My hand faltered in mid-stroke. "You don't want to be me, Miss Bame," I said, finally resuming my task. "Why is that?" she said. To my extreme mortification, that's all it took. The slightest show of interest, the merest polite question, for the floodgates to open. I told her how I worried I was being a good companion, that I'd been warned she was of fragile health and was not to be upset for any reason, or I might get sent back to the state home where I was nothing but 1,000 unwanted and meant nothing to anyone, where kids were dying of influenza, and everyone at the high school never let me forget I was a bastard, and how I hated that word, loathed it like nothing else, because it reminded me over and over again that the story of my parents' marriage was false, a fairy tale, and that my mother, who I loved more than anyone on earth, had lied to me and then died and left me to learn the truth from strangers. She died before I could ask her what really happened, if she and my father had loved each other even a little, or if it had just been the endless champagne, or— Wait, Miss Bame interrupted. Who said I wasn't supposed to be upset for any reason? Was it my husband? I blinked, dazed at being pulled so abruptly out of my story. Yes, he said you had a very fragile constitution and weren't to be upset for any reason. A fragile constitution, she echoed, leaning back against her pillows and smiling a cold little smile. Oh, that's priceless. It makes me sound like a gardenia, something frail by nature, rather than by interference, and explains my decline so neatly, don't you agree? I don't know what you mean, I said, hurt by her complete disregard for my story. No, I don't suppose you do, she said, sighing. I could feel her watching me, but became very busy, polishing the handbrush handle with the hem of my skirt. Louise. She touched my wrist, stilling my busy work. Did you have a special beau before you came to us? Someone who held your hand and told you he could never live without you and now is doing exactly that? No, I mumbled. I thought not. A female moves differently after becoming the object of male attention. She becomes more aware of herself. She fell silent a moment, fingers rubbing absently the edge of the quilt, and when she spoke her voice was low and careful. I would like to tell you something important, something I believe your mother might have shared had you been a little older when she passed. I glanced up, but her gaze had shifted, and she was staring at the heavy gold band too big for her finger. I have gathered a handful of pearls, each begun as a tiny, irritating fleck of incense that slipped past the shell and settled in to sully the bed of the oyster. They're my pearls, my hand-worn, misshapen little treasures, and no other living soul on earth knows I've collected them. Up until this moment I believed they would go to the grave along with me, and no one would ever benefit from them, but now her gaze met mine. I'm going to share them with you, and when you have them all, you will have the beginnings of your own strand. Miss Bame, really, that's very generous of you, I said, uneasy at the strange light in her eyes, but I'm not sure I'm allowed to accept such an expensive gift. And then she laughed, harsh and sudden, and when she looked at me again there was no humor in her eyes, and the intensity had been replaced with compassion. Oh, my dear, she said softly, shaking her head, don't you know that you have no choice? I paused the CD and glanced over at Gran, glad to see she was still awake. You know, I don't know if I like this lady or not. Want to hear more chapter? She blinked once. I hit play and settled back to listen. How it ends. So I went on to tell me, as I brushed about the day she and Dr. Bame first met. As she spoke, her voice lightened, grew girlish, and ultimately eerie in its unconscious parody of youth. It was May, and only Nanny, Cook, and I were at home. Nanny was upstairs resting, and I was in the parlor putting the first spring lilacs in a vase when I heard the front open door and my father speaking to someone. I couldn't imagine what he was doing home in the middle of the day, as on Wednesdays he always made free house calls to the less fortunate, and they always kept him so long that he never even came home in time for dinner in the evening. Naturally, I became alarmed and hurried out to the foyer, only to collide with... She paused, as if expecting me to say something, perhaps guess, so I said, "Dr. Bame?" "Yes," she cried, clapping her hands. "Only he wasn't a respected doctor back then, Louise. He was just plain Thaddeus Bame. A filthy, skinny boy, all spotty with scabs and splotchy from crying." She leaned closer to me, eyes gleaming, and oh, my dear, he smelled just terrible, but believe me when I say that if I hadn't brought the lilacs in with me, I almost certainly would have gagged. "Really," I said, pulling back slightly. "Yes, but all I said was, 'Father, are you well?' before burying my nose in the bouquet. When I spoke, the boy lifted his head and looked at me, and when he did, his eyes grew round as saucers, and I promise you this is true. He looked at me like I was an angel," she said, and her voice began to tremble. "He did, even though I had on my third best blouse, my hair bow slipping. He didn't see any of that, Louise. He didn't see any of my faults first that day." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Now, despite all the years I've spent struggling to please him, my faults are all he sees, and since they're unforgivable, he chooses not to look." "Oh, I'm sure that's not true," I said, alarmed by her tears and the rise in her voice. "You're ill, Miss Bame. Naturally, he doesn't want to excite you." "You don't know," she said, turning her face away and swiping a hand across her cheek. "Fix my hair now, please. Braid it neat and tight, in the event he does decide to visit, and then please leave me." I did as she asked because I didn't know what else to do. Late that night I heard the rumble of a truck, loud in the country, quiet. I rose, went to my window, craning my neck, followed in headlights around the back of the house, down the snowy stone driveway to the workshop where, unless my eyes deceived me, a man met with Dr. Bame and led 2 large, slow-moving deer out of the truck and into the workshop. I mentioned it to Nurse the next morning and received a sharp "mind your business." After that it seemed wiser not to ask. Dr. Bame continued to disappear each day into his workshop or the woods and walked the tree line outside, talking animatedly and occasionally waving his arms, while the new handyman Peter stood listening without expression. An unpleasant smell has pervaded the house, not at all once, and not everywhere, but in pockets, sometimes strong, sometimes faint, sometimes early in the morning when I first step out of my room, and all the way to the bathroom, and less often late at night when I finish the kitchen work and I'm on my way up to bed. It's different from the scent Dr. Bame normally carries, and one I regret to say I've almost become used to. That's more a wild smell, bloated decay mixed with the panicked musk of a dying animal, feces and urine, often threaded with a garlicky scent of arsenic or the string of chemicals. This scent is fainter yet fresher at the same time, the terrible sweet smell of infection, old blood, and bad flesh, and it scares me enough that I don't bring it up, that I catch my breath and pass through it swiftly like it doesn't exist, because I'm afraid to think of what it could be and what it will bring. I paused the player and looked at Gran. Sleeping. Darn it! We would have had time for more chapter. Sighing, I turned it off and went to get the food ready for the cats and the deer, and when I slipped outside to collect all the old used paper plates from the ground and lifted off the lid of a garbage can that had been sitting in the sun, I got a noseful of the smell of old rotting cat food and almost freaked out. Seth told me to dress because he was taking me out for dinner for our anniversary, so me and Sammy went to the mall after school, and I found a really sleek little black dress and high heels. My father looked askance at the dress and was like, "Where's the other half?" My mother, who usually runs interference for me, said, "What about the lower heels?" And I got all freaked because I wanted to look like I had legs a mile long, but I just griped, so I went into my room, put on lower heels, stuck my high ones in my purse to put on the car on the way down. Seth showed up 10 minutes late, which annoyed me. He's late a lot, which sometimes I don't mind, but on our anniversary you'd think he would have gotten a better effort. And wouldn't you know that instead of walking in and whistling or something, he just raised his eyebrows at the dress, cleared his throat, and said, "Ready?" And I was like, "Oh, you're kidding, right?" But of course I didn't say it, not in front of my parents. So he left, and of course I looked stupid trying to climb up into the SUV and keep my dress down at the same time, but I finally made it. Now granted, he'd already said happy anniversary to me at school and given me a red rose that I had come at home in the water now. Maybe his family didn't make a big deal out of anniversaries, but this was our first one, and where is the romance? "Are you okay?" I asked when we got onto the highway and I was busy changing shoes. "You haven't even said anything about my new dress." "Yeah, I'm He made a face. It's a little short, isn't it? My jaw dropped. I mean, I've been thinking about your reputation and all. What? I said, astounded. What reputation? He shrugged. I don't want all these guys thinking that about my girlfriend, you know? I just sat there staring at him, still too shocked and, yeah, insulted to say anything. So maybe you should just tone it down a little, he said, signaling and switching to the middle lane. And maybe dress like that only when we're alone together, because, yeah, you definitely look hot. Smiling, he reached over and took my hand, not seeming to notice my silence. So, you hungry? They have great crab legs here, and tonight's the all-you-can-eat buffet. Do you like crab? Sure, I said, staring at the window and the depressing scenery, and trying to reason my way through this, because in a way, I understood what he was saying, but in another, that was really hurtful. Hey, when do you want your present? He said, reaching into his pocket and flashing me a little foil-wrapped box. Now, at dinner or after dinner? Surprise me, I said with a forced smile. He smiled back and leaned over a little so I could kiss him, and then he put his hand on my leg, and teasing said, So what do you have under there, anyway? And I gave him a very wicked look, and I said, That's for me to know and you to find out. Here, you go first. I gave him his gift, the one I'd spent days searching for online, rummaging through endless vintage car sites and auctions, scrabbling desperately to unearth just the right classic MG keyring for the year of the car he was trying to buy, and he loved it. He gazed at it, jaw-sacked, and laughed, held it up, and looked at me like I was amazing. Holy crap, I can't believe it. Where the H did you find this? It wasn't easy, I said, laughing as he hugged me. Do you like it? Are you kidding? You just blew me away. He kissed me. You're really something. Well, I try, I said demurely, and he laughed and kissed me again. Here, he said finally, putting the keyring in the jacket pocket and handing me my gift. Now you, now me. I ran a slow nail along the taped edge and unfolded the wrapping paper, opened the little white box, heart pounding and blood thrumming with an anticipation that was way bigger than anything I'd felt before, even at Christmas, and as I lifted the lid, I couldn't help hoping gold ring and... Oh, I chirped, staring down at the delicate silver chain with 3 plain silver balls nestled on the bed of cotton. Wow, look at that. I held it up, watching the tiny links twinkle as they caught the light. How pretty. I don't have anything silver, either. Thank you. The chain looked too small for a necklace and kind of big for a bracelet, but that was just one of the several shocked WTF thoughts whirling through my mind. Put it on me? I handed it to him and held out my wrist. He looked at my wrist, puzzled, then grinned. Sure. Ignoring my waiting hand, he shoved back his chair and, grasping my ankle, laid my foot across his lap, never noticing my sudden stillness. I should be a pro at this by now. He flicked his hair out of his eyes and, lowering his head, fumbled with the clasp. Surprised you think they'd make them easier to put on, though. If I ever get it hooked, you're never going to be able to get it off again without breaking it. I was glad he wasn't looking at me. There, he said, leaning back and smiling. What do you think? And I looked at my ankle with the silver chain looped around it, and the 3 silver balls, and my eyes burned with tears, which turned out to be good because he thought it was because I loved it. Later that night, we parked off a deserted, dead-end street and climbed into the way back of his SUV. It didn't take long for my dress to go up, but when he tried peeling off my pantyhose, the ankle bracelet snagged on the sheer fabric. He tried tugging the pantyhose off beneath it, swearing good-naturedly and squinting to unhook the clasp in the dim light. I lay there waiting, cooling off, letting him wrestle with it and listening as his muttering took a sharper turn, wondering if he'd noticed my detachment, and if he did, what he would make of it. Think maybe you could help me out here? He finally snapped. So I sat up and without a word calmly peeled the pantyhose off the other leg, leaving it bunched and torn under the bracelet, and laid back down. He laughed softly, good humor restored, and eased back up beside me, kissed me, ran his hand over my stomach, hip bones, and lower, down my bare thigh and up again, where he lingered. As the window steamed, the breathing deepened, and finally, when the hand I had on him didn't take him there, he stopped kissing me and urged my head south. I called Sammy when I got home. He got you what? She said, sounding shocked. An ankle bracelet, I repeated. But you don't wear those, she said. I know. You don't even like them. I know. Does he know you hate them? He should, I said. I've said it 100 times. Yeah, whenever he's admiring one on another girl. Why would he buy something he knows you don't like? Because he likes them, I said, and then feeling disloyal, added, I mean, it's not ugly, it's silver. Silver, she blurted. OMG, Hannah. Has he ever even met you? You don't wear silver. I know, I said again. What am I supposed to do? Tell him to take it back, and this time remember who he's shopping for, she said promptly. I can't do that, I said. Why not? Because it's too late, I said, lying back on the bed and gazing up at the ceiling. It would only hurt his feelings and make me sound like an ungrateful bee. And he did try, Sam. I mean, at least he got me something, right? Yeah, she said, sounding unconvinced. But he'd tell you, you know, if you got him something he never wanted and didn't even like. He'd tell you in a heartbeat. Maybe, I said, but my voice rang hollow. Later that night, I ended up cutting my pantyhose off with a scissor so as not to disturb the ankle bracelet. Chapter 28, Hannah. I took my ankle bracelet off, put it on my pantyhose, reattached it, and wore it to school. Seth smiled when he saw it and hugged me. The only thing that bugged me was that Sammy told me she'd seen Lacey McMullen haunting the upstairs hall near Seth's locker, looking all tragic. What is it about Seth being stalked by lovesick girls? I hate the irony of this, I really do. Goodbye, virginity, hello, woman of the world. He did it when I wasn't expecting it, was already inside me when I remembered about a condom, freaked and stiffened up. He said, "Don't worry, I won't come in you," and I was like, "You better not," and it didn't take hardly a minute before he yanked it out in time. But I'll tell you this, I never worried so much in my life until I got my period, and spent money I didn't have on 2 early pregnancy P-tests, both negative, that I had to take to school so no one but Sammy would know. He tried to do it again 2 days later, and I was like, "No, not without a condom," and he got pissed off. And I worried too much, and he knew when to pull out. I was like, "Easy for you to say, you wouldn't be the one stuck with a really bad decision to make." And it just got worse from there. I felt bad saying no because it was like I was rejecting him, but I also felt bad because I wanted him to understand that I would be the one who got stuck, not him. But I don't think he ever really got past the fact that he couldn't budge me on that. Of course, I ended up crying because I hate when he pulls away and won't talk and leaves me with all these unresolved problems. It's like he'd rather step out of it, and because he does that, it gets real quiet and we hit a stalemate. I can't stand the stalemate, so I either get even more emotional trying to make him respond to me, which freaks me out because I'm not usually so high drama, and crying makes me feel weak and needy, like I'm begging. Sometimes I wish I could just say whatever I want to, like a guy does, just say it flat out, and he would be the one to have to humble himself to make things nice and bring us back together, but it doesn't seem to happen that way. I mean, I watch his mom, and she's always chatty and cheerful, filling the silences with her words, and I don't know whether his father thinks she likes to talk to herself, but if he does, he's wrong. I bet she does it because she's trying to connect with him somehow, to make him look up and see her as a person, someone who is interesting and worth looking at and listening to. Like the other day when we were in his room, and his mom got home, I heard his father say, "Bull, nobody goes shopping 4 times in 1 week, Ellen." You don't know much about women," Seth's mother said. "I know about you," he said. It didn't sound like a compliment. "Seth has company," his mother said evenly. "Do you really want to start this now?" "Come on," Seth said, grabbing his wallet and keys. "Let's go to Burger King." Okay, I said, because it was always embarrassing when they got into it. "So what did you buy?" Seth's father said. "Window shopping. I was window shopping." "You must think I'm really stupid, Ellen." And we just kind of sidled out, and Seth was in a distant mood that night, bad mood. He said something really mean while he was watching some group of girls talking and laughing and acting up a little on the street, like, "See how slutty you look when you act like that?" I didn't say anything, and he must have been itching for a fight because he said, "What? You don't think every single one of us can be replaced?" And I got really quiet and then sad because I felt so bad for him, and that seemed to deflate him because he just sighed and tipped his head back on the seat and looked at me and said, "Face it, Hannah. If it wasn't me, it would just be somebody else." And it came out tired, but it was like an accusation too, like I didn't love him, and all the things that were so beautiful between us could have happened with anybody, and that really hurt. I'm watching my mother now, too, how sometimes when my father's cranky, she gets nicer, like try to smooth his time at home and make it a place he wants to be instead of a place that's unpleasant. But I know something else, too. When she feels something, she just says it. She doesn't dilute it so as not to pee him off, especially if it's a strong opinion. And he's apparently okay with it, or at least he's used to it, because most of the time he just shrugs and says, "You're entitled to your opinion." And I've heard him say that for years, but I think I'm starting to understand what it really means. The show makers do this, too. Interesting. I feel like the weak link in my family of the Amazonian women. For some reason, Seth gets cranky when I read, especially when I read while he's practicing his guitar. He says he's playing for me, so I should watch and listen. And I do watch and listen for like 15 whole minutes, but sometimes he plays for an hour, and there's no way I can sit there and do nothing but watch him for an hour. I told him that, and he got peeved and said, "Oh, but you can read about people who aren't even real for an hour? You don't live in an effing novel, Hannah. You live in real life." And I was like, "Yeah, I know, but what's the difference between you disappearing into music and me into a book?" And do you know what he said? "I don't do it to get away from you," he said. OMG, this is one of those tense spots we just can't seem to get around, but it's no big deal. He's also working more hours at the bowling alley, almost full time now, and says I have too much free time. And that's irresponsible. And I should get a job too and save for a car and stuff, so I think I'm going to. I told Gran that if she could stay awake a little longer, we could listen to a few more chapters of the book. I mean, I don't want to tire her out, but this few chapters a day stuff is killing me. How it ends. Nurse has taken to scrubbing everything in the house with foul-smelling disinfectant as if she were driven by demons, and will not stop to answer even the simplest questions. March brought the first crocuses of the spring poking up through the snow on my mother's birthday. I had been near tears all week, missing her, remembering her last party when we gathered around Kitty's kitchen table singing "Oh So Stupidly Young at Heart," and then "Happy Birthday," pretending not to see the blue tinge to her lips and secretly hoping she'd have enough breath to blow out the candles. I missed her and needed a way to mark the day, so while Nurse was busy scrubbing and Dr. Bame was off in the woods with his rifle, I decided to go cut some of the forsythia in the shed, bring it in, and force it into blooming in her honor. I found a pair of scissors and crunched my way across the bleak yard. I'd cut 3 slim branches when someone said hello. I turned, startled, and the handyman was standing there. He was younger than I thought, in his early 20s perhaps, with ruddy skin, dark eyes, and a tight, hesitant smile. He had an accent I couldn't place, but very broad shoulders. "Oh," I said, clearing my throat. "Hello, I'm Louise." "Peter," he said, stepping closer, pulling off his work glove and offering his hand. I hesitated, not knowing whether I should take it, or if shaking hands would be considered fraternizing, and by the time I decided it wasn't, he had already lowered his hand and was returning to leave. "No, wait, I'm sorry, it's just that—" I stopped, flushing. How could I tell him I wasn't allowed to talk to him without sounding ridiculous? "The boss doesn't want us to get too friendly," he said with a twinkle in his eyes. "He told you that, too?" I said, astonished. "Sure," he said with a shrug. "But this is a free country, right?" Before I could answer, a door slammed down at the workshop. Peter winked and melted back into the tree line behind the pines. I turned back to the barren forsythia bush and cut a few more branches, nodding at Dr. Bame as he strode past me into the shed, reappearing a moment later with a large and lethal-looking pair of grass clippers and returned to the workshop. I set the branches and a glass of water on the nightstand in my room, took the Zero souvenir photo out from under my pillow, and studied my parents' faces. My mother looked sparkly with pent-up excitement, my father handsome in his uniform, leaning back and giving the camera an arched eyebrow and a cocky smile. Had it been love at first sight, an instant knowing that they were meant to be together? Had the hazy army chaplain wedding behind the nightclub been real, or just a ruse used by Randy G.I. to take advantage of a young girl? If it had been real, why hadn't my mother put Walter Clausen on the birth certificate? I wish I knew. I touched her face, the girl in the photo who was only 3 years older than me, kissed it and pressed it to my cheek, then slid it back under the pillow and went down to make Miss Bame's dinner. That evening Miss Bame told me of her wedding day and the night that followed. Margaret and Thaddeus Bame had a beautiful ceremony, from the orange blossoms in the bouquet to the Viennese lace on her late mother's veil. Everything had been perfect. 28-year-old Thaddeus, her father's protege, had grown up to be a dashingly handsome, if not touch solemn, young man, leading his class in medical school and wooing Margaret with charm, respect, and just the right degree of fervor. But the wedding night, well, that had been puzzling. Margaret, 20 and armed with only scant, skewed advice from an unmarried Minnie, and about to be a good wife, accept your lot and do your duty, from her father, who had then turned and given Thaddeus a long speaking look before wishing them well on their honeymoon trip, and pink-cheeked giggles from her second cousin bridesmaids, had stood beside her husband at the Niagara Falls hotel desk, trying not to blush when the clerk smiled, rang for a bellboy, and directed them to the honeymoon suite. A week earlier, and without mentioning to Nanny, who is a staunch believer in serviceable cotton nightgowns, Margaret had slipped away and gone back to the bridal store to spend 2 full blushing hours trying on peignoir sets, beautiful gossamer silk and satin nightgowns with alluring lace straps and strategically placed inserts, plunging necklines and gathered bodices, all in drifts of clinging, nearly sheer fabric that was both frightening and thrilling. She purchased 3, one in white, for the wedding night, a creation so angelically lovely and wickedly revealing that she hoped she'd have the nerve to wear it, and nearly fainted imagining the look in Thaddeus's eyes when he saw her in it. A pink one with pin tucks, and a simple blue one with sheer panels across the bodice that she'd first thought too forward, but afterward, in a frenzy of excitement, had run back for. And because her father would be getting the bill, she asked the salesgirl to write the receipt as wedding accessories instead of lingerie, as that would have been terribly embarrassing. The honeymoon suite was lovely. A living room with a bar and a TV, 2 bathrooms, and a bedroom with lights low, champagne on ice, a double bed turned down, and chocolates on the pillows. She had turned to Thaddeus, overwhelmed with love and nerves, happiness and hazy expectations, and he put a tender hand to her cheek, kissed her briefly, and said he'd forgotten his pipe tobacco and would run down to the smoke shop on a lobby to get some. She smiled, thinking he was giving her a chance at modesty. When he left, she quickly opened her suitcase and shook out the dreamy white peignoir set, rushed through a quick toilette, taking a sink bath with a fluffy washcloth and rose-scented soap, freshening up all the parts she thought might be necessary, then slipped into the shimmering rayon satin negligee and chiffon robe. She brushed her hair, dabbed arpege perfume behind her ears and knees, brushed her teeth, reapplied her lipstick, taking a deep breath, opened the bathroom door and went into the bedroom. He wasn't back yet, and she didn't want to open the champagne without him, so she drank some tap water instead, just to ease her dry throat, and reclined on the bed in what she hoped was a provocative position, and she waited. He returned 45 minutes later, his expression remote and unapproachable, his pipe full, and oddly enough, he had a smudge of what looked like, but certainly couldn't be, a pancake makeup on front of his trousers. "I'm sorry, Margaret, but I believe one of the wedding guests may have passed on some type of stomach flu, and I was the unlucky recipient. I don't want you to catch it too, so I'm going to sleep out here on the sofa." "Oh no, Thaddeus, please." "I don't mind if we both get sick," she said, sitting up and giving him a shy smile. "It is our wedding night, and you look lovely, but I refuse to take you with this," he said, shaking his head. "No, don't get up. It will only make my removal more difficult." "But Thaddeus," she said, rising anyway and approaching him. "Won't you even—" "Margaret, please," he said, suddenly stern. "A lady does not beg for affection, and a wife does not embarrass her husband by demanding more than he can give. I am not fit to be a proper groom tonight, so please go to bed, and I'll see you in the morning." And nodding, he stepped out of the room and closed the door behind him, leaving her open-mouthed and sick with embarrassment. "He was ill for the entire honeymoon," Miss Bames said, toying with the frilly edge of the coverlet and glancing at me from under her lashes. "I didn't know what to think, Louise, and there was no one I could ask, so I thought I'd done something wrong, that I was too eager or willing, and that I should be more demure and less—" She sighed and shook her head. "Accommodating, I guess. I don't know." Anyway, when we returned from the honeymoon, he carried me over the threshold into our first little bungalow, and I thought maybe now we would become husband and wife in more name only. But he had already instructed the movers to put our things in separate bedrooms. I know that's old-fashioned, and I said so, but he insisted. He said a physician kept irregular hours and couldn't bear the thought of disturbing me every time he had an emergency call. I protested and said I didn't mind at all, but her voice faltered. I seemed to be the only one disappointed by the plans, and so the arrangement continued. She looked away, and continues to this day. I studied the carpet, embarrassed by the intimate revelation and not sure what to say. "I know Nurse considers me a failure as a woman and a wife, but I need him, Louise. He's the only man I've ever wanted. I know the sight of me as I am now is distressing, and I try to make myself more attractive, but I so rarely get to see him. I hear him walk down the hall to my heart, my whole body just aches." She took a shaky breath. "You're too young to understand, but I love him, and I miss him. I miss touching him and being a real wife." She said more, I know, but I had started singing Happy Birthday to my mother in my head, so I missed it. Nurse was cleaning constantly now, scrubbing, waxing, boiling the bedding, lost in a world of disinfectant and invisible germs, in chewing the skin off from her chapped bottom lip until it bled, often appearing at Miss Bames' door right after lunch, before I could begin brushing her hair and ordering me from the room, remaining inside with the door closed and locked behind me. Dr. Bame quit shaving and spent his days dressed in stained and unkempt work clothes. He came in for the workshop at night, wearing bloody gloves with bits of fat and raw greased gray flesh clinging to his sleeves, with boots caked with fetid gore, and his gaze feverish, jubilant, angry, his hands shaking, and a finger always wearing a raw sore at the back of his neck near his shirt collar. He changed his gloves before he ate, though, before deciding to move the 2-foot-tall white plaster sculpture out of his study and into the middle of the dining table. He would stare at it as if in pain throughout the meal, not even bothering to acknowledge me and Nurse anymore, muttering instead at the statue, a woman with the barest of facial features, and cradling a young child in her arms. The child's head was nestled in the crook of her shoulder, and its arms wound around her neck. It was a stark, beautiful piece, and while Dr. Bame was very possessive of it, pausing to stroke the face or turn it slightly toward his place at the table, I touched it too when no one was looking, because the statue's tender embrace made me think of my mother. Nurse and I never quite questioned the statue's presence, supposing, I guess, that the centerpiece could have been far worse. The stuffed bodies of any number of animals, and even Peter, allowed to move the brake front, so Nurse would scrub behind it, paused when he saw the statue. He reached out, noticed his own dirty hand, and stepped back, turned quickly away, but not before I noticed tears gathered in his eyes. I never thought of leaving them, of calling home and trying to explain how they placed me in the household. It was not what it had seemed. It would sound too dramatic, and I would hear the impatience in the ward mother's tone. "Well, of course Dr. Bame smells unpleasant after working on his taxidermy, Louise. I would venture he smells the same after leaving the operating room. This is no cause for alarm, or cleanliness is next to godliness, and the nurse should be commended for her vigilance in fighting illness. I wish we had more like her here, as the wards are full of sick children. I could have called and begged to be returned anyway, I guess, but the fact remains that I didn't. I accepted, absorbed, and adapted to the whims of the adults because that's what a young girl does, especially a one desperate to belong to someone, somewhere. Chapter 29, Hannah. I was in the snack aisle down at 7-Eleven trying to decide between nacho cheese and Cool Ranch Doritos when a low, easy voice said, "Hey, this must be my lucky day." It was Jesse, and he was with another guy, both of them wearing dusty jeans and battered work boots. Jesse had on a Mason's t-shirt and an open flannel under his denim jacket, and his dreads were pulled back into a ponytail. He looked tired and grubby, gorgeous, cheeks pink with cold, dark eyes warm, and that delightfully plummy bottom lip curved in a mischievous smile. I said I didn't know how long we would have stood there, gazing at each other, if his buddy hadn't reached past him, grabbed a bag of pork rinds with a lack, and said, "You ever eat these things, man? They're great, but they make you fart." Jesse blinked, snorted, and turned away, shaking his head. "That's it," I said, laughing and grabbing my own bag of nacho cheese Doritos. "I'm out of here. See you, Jess." I walked around the rack and was heading for the register when I heard Jesse say, "Nice timing, a-hole." "What are you talking about?" his buddy said, sounding puzzled. I paid and left, and you know what's interesting? Every time I see Jesse, he always leaves me glad I did. There's not a lot of people I can say that about. Grandpa was just finishing up cleaning Soretta's litter box when I finally got there. "She's not so good today," he said in a low voice. "Watch her close, all right?" "Oh, Grandpa," I said, and crumbling hugged him. Not long. He hugged me quick and put me aside, wiping a shaky hand across his eyes, and then grabbed his crossing guard gear and hurried out. I looked at Gran. "He loves you a lot, you know." I waited, but she didn't answer, so of course I gave her a sip of water and hit play. How it ends. The snow melted and the sun returned, coaxing daffodils and then tulips and azaleas into blooming and brightening up the soggy, muddy yard. Miss Bain wasn't doing so well. The pain and increased medication made her vague and moody, at times lucid and sweet, and at others backbitingly bitter. She insisted on sitting in the chair by the window, and I brushed her hair despite the fact that she was often in agony, saying she wanted to see spring arrive, but actually watching the door of the workshop stiffening whenever it opened, and Dr. Bain strode out, catching her breath, leaning forward, placing her fingertips on the glass in a ready wave that he apparently never looked up and saw. She was rail thin now and worried. I asked Nurse if I could vary her diet and cook her special tempting treats, but Nurse, busy scrubbing the bathroom, said no. Doctor had put her on a specific diet and must stick to it. Dr. Bame's appetite waned even further, and her wedding ring began slipping off her bony finger while she slept, causing us a daily search among the bedding. Usually it was somewhere up amid her pillows, but the last time it wasn't, and I was forced to search further, to peel back each layer of quilt and blanket, until I found the ring laying near her hip, atop a stained mattress pad, and giving me my first horrifying look at her bare mottled thighs. Twin sticks riddled with raging, weeping sores beginning at her knees and disappearing up beneath her silky blue nightgown. Blackened, bone-deep holes with edges eaten raw and surrounded by necrotic tissue. "OMG!" I blurted, dropping the sheet and backing away from what I thought were the worst bed sores I'd ever seen. Struggling, she pulled down her nightgown and cried hoarsely, "Don't look at me like that! Stop it, Louise! Stop it! Don't you dare turn away and pretend you didn't see! Sit down!" So I sat, paralyzed by the shocking strength of her anger, ashamed at how quickly I turned away, at how desperately I hadn't wanted to see what festered beneath the beautifully flowered covers. "I'm 38 years old, Louise. The simple fact is that I'm dying," she said, disregarding my stricken gasp and sliding the ring back onto her scrawny finger. "I've made less than 5 decisions of any importance whatsoever in my entire life, and while it would be useless for me to regret them now, I have paid a heavy price for allowing others to decide my fate." A flash of annoyance crossed her face. "You look at me as if I'm speaking a foreign language. Is it so hard to absorb?" "Yes, no, I don't know," I said helplessly. "Please, Miss Bain, don't excite yourself. I don't want you to die." "Oh, Louise," she said, rubbing her forehead, "please don't try to stop me from speaking my mind for once in my life. It's difficult enough to try to find the words for things I most urgently want to tell you, but to know that you, too, would rather I took this poison to my deathbed just to maintain the ridiculous facade is truly more than I can bear. So I'm going to speak, and you're going to listen. You will not leave here armed only with the fairy tale that those who will someday love you will always act in your best interest, and because of that love, you don't have to think about your own future. You will not." She paused, breathing hard, jaw clenched with pain, and told me of a betrayal that has haunted me my whole life. "My father was a brilliant physician and a kind, generous man, but the arrogant one, who believed men were superior and all else on earth existed only to serve them," Miss Bain said. "I was raised to be a good girl, to speak softly and be pleasing to the eye, and be gentle and innocent and agreeable, and to be able to run a household and embroider and arrange flowers, and never to question a man's decision, as I could not possibly understand the issue anyway. I was not allowed to raise my voice for any reason other than a house fire, be openly angry, or state my wishes directly, and those behaviors were considered unbecoming in a female. I could, however, ask nicely for things, and the sweeter the smile, the more submissive the voice, the more I was rewarded with approval. If, however, I asked bluntly, or stated an opposing opinion, if my father thought my request was unnecessary or unseemly, I was simply not allowed to do it, whether it was looking something up in one of those medical books, or having a second serving of tapioca pudding at dinner. I realized that my father loved me most when I was what he wanted me to be, and was most disappointed in me when the least loving, when I exerted my own small will or did not do as he expected. So I learned early to put my own wishes aside and tend to him first, to believe that I could not make a decision because I was only an uneducated, over-emotional female, subject to the whims of my reproductive organs. Yes, I am finally saying that aloud, and would ruin my life and ever the misfortune to gain control of it. She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Are you all right? I said, half rising in my chair. Should I make tea? No, stay, she said hoarsely, and reached for my hand. Oh, Louise, I did love my father dearly, and I feel like a traitor saying these things, but they must be said. They must if you are ever going to gain from them. I took her hand, sat back down, steeled myself to listen, because if it was true, if she was dying, then I didn't want to be left once again with questions but no answers. She told me that despite her father's attempt to limit her exposure to the harsher side of life, he was a physician, a man who possessed fascinating stories, and she was a curious child with a penchant for wending her way around the rules, so while she couldn't come right out and ask to hear the intriguing stories of his day, she did find another way. My father never knew I knew this, but after hours, once I was supposed to be long asleep, he and cook, never Nanny because she didn't drink, would meet in his study, pour snifters of brandy, and discuss the events of the day. She gave me a speaking look. Naturally, this was highly irregular, but I'm assuming my father was lonely for female companionship, as he never did remarry after my mother passed. She fell silent a moment as if pondering, then shrugged. I discovered purely by chance, if you understand, that if a person tiptoed into the spare bedroom, got down on her hands and knees, was very quiet, she could hear everything they said through the heating grate. Smart, I said. Thank you, she said with a dignified nod, and then resumed her story. The night my father brought Thaddeus home, he said Tad was to be given a bath and put in a spare room off the kitchen. I knew from the look on Cook's face that she was going to have a few things to say that night, so I waited until Nanny had fallen asleep, and then tiptoed into the spare room. Miss Bain paused, frowning, and glanced at the closed door. What? I said, following her gaze. Nothing, she said after a moment. I thought I heard something. Would you check, please? I rose, unnerved by her sudden stillness, and quickly crossed the room, threw open the door, and looked out into the empty hallway. The smell was there. The smell was in here, too, so Dr. Bain's room was just down the hall, so honestly I couldn't tell if it was fresh or lingering from earlier. I sniffed again, but didn't smell Nurse's telltale disinfectant anywhere, so I just shook my head, closed the door, and sat back down. All right, she said, shifting in her bed. Now where was I? Oh yes, eavesdropping on my father and cook the night Thaddeus arrived. It was so frustrating, Louise, not to be able to ask who he was or why he was so filthy, or what had prompted my father to bring him home. So frustrating to be patted on the head and told to run along, that Thaddeus would be living with us now, and I could always visit him later, but not to pester him with questions. She shook her head. Is there any torment on earth worse than questions without answers? No, I said, and meant it. Well, I heard Cook say, this boy has seen a hard life, Doctor. He's been beaten and badly used, and I doubt he's ever taken a real bath in his life. He's unclean. Unclean, a word that could mean anything. Useless, Louise, utterly useless. She gazed past me into yesterday, seeing things I could never see. I heard my father give a heavy sigh, and then he told her what had prompted him to remove Thaddeus from his home. Her father, she said, had sipped his French brandy and told Cook he had been called down to a wretched section of town, tenements and slums, outhouses and wells right near them, a place where typhoid and diphtheria had once flourished, and based on what he'd seen, surely would again. The hovel requiring his services had been the worst he'd ever seen. The man of his house was little more than a drunken, breathing, syphilitic shell, sitting slumped against the wall, a bottle of whiskey in his hand, his forehead almost of his cheek eaten away by a runny, ravaging gumma. But Cook, as astounding as it is, he wasn't the reason I'd been called out, he said. The reason was a woman lying on the bed, surrounded by filthy, scabby, spotty children. Siblings, he later discovered, but none bearing any resemblance to the other. They were watching their mother, scrawny, deplorably filthy, covered with seeping sores, and attempting to deliver yet another child. I shooed them all away except for the oldest boy, who I asked to heat some water. The good doctor said the rest of the children were cretins with dull eyes and deformed limbs, but this lad seemed aware and hastened to assist me. I wore gloves, of course, 2 pairs, as I made my initial examination of the woman, expecting to find her dilated and near to delivering the next poor bastard. However, she was not dilated, there was no fetal heartbeat, and she would not stop thrashing and moaning. So I had to ask the lad to restrain her. He did, crying, and she screamed, "Help me, Daddy, it's eating me alive!" Which of course was an appropriate thing to say to such a young boy, who should never have been witnessing such an unhappy scene anyway, but I bypassed this, because she was so obviously out of her head. The boy begged me to help her, but I couldn't deliver a baby that wasn't there, so I examined further and determined it was a very large malignant tumor of the womb, and given her a malnourished state. The active syphilis she'd no doubt suffered her whole life, her irregular heartbeat, and the strain of her faltering body measured out a dose of morphine and informed him that I was giving her something to ease her pain. "And it did?" Cook said. "Yes," he said quietly. Her heart stopped while I was explaining the nature of her illness to the brood, how it was inoperable and would continue to consume her, causing untold agony and a slow, miserable death. Only the boy seemed to understand any portion of what I said, or even cared. They had no telephone, of course, so I pronounced the time of the death and packed up my things, intending to go and call the coroner, when the boy caught my eye. He had washed his hands and tried to comb his matted hair, was standing by his mother's body, weeping. He looked at me and said, "My ma is dead." "I know, lad," I said. "I'm sorry." He looked past me and spotted my stethoscope on the table where I'd left it and returned it to me, even though he could have sold it somewhere and probably gotten enough money to feed the whole wretched lot for a month. It was at that moment, Cook, when he handed it to me, and then he said, "I want to be a doctor too, sir," and it touched me so deeply, given his hopeless circumstances, that he cleared his throat. "Well, you see what I've done. If he turns out to be mentally defective, or his contagious legacy destroys him, then I've gambled on the wrong horse. If not, then perhaps he will defy his birthright and follow in my footsteps." "But his scourge," Cook said, "can you cure it so he's fit?" "Perhaps not cure it, but I can certainly manage it," the doctor said. "Tomorrow I will begin treating him with mercury pills, and we will watch for sores, tooth loss, and most importantly, obvious neurological damage, although that may not reveal itself so readily and may instead manifest over a matter of time. Unfortunately, I have no choice, and so until I indicate otherwise, keep him for Margaret, feed him on separate dishes, and have him use the hired man's facilities. Find him a decent set of clothing, as I'm sure he'll want to attend his mother's funeral. It will be a Potter's Field affair, and I question my own wisdom in allowing him to attend, but he seemed quite attached to the poor wretch and feels guilty over her unhappy death. It was necessary, but I want no resentment at me spurring him through life. And quietly, he has much to overcome, Cook. God only knows what he's already seen in his young life. He is a handsome boy, now that he's clean," Cook said. "How old do you think he is?" "He says he's 16, the doctor said, "a young man so nutritionally deprived that he has yet to enter puberty." "Oh, my goodness," Cook said. "Exactly," the doctor said. "You can understand now why freeing the mother to free the child was indeed an act of mercy." Silence. "Do you think he knew?" "No," the doctor said abruptly, "and we will never speak of it again. Of course, my father made me swear she'd never tell me. So I had to act, of course, in the beginning, so I wouldn't make her suspicious, but that all passed fair quickly once Thaddeus settled into our house. So that's how he came to be the son my father never had, his prized protege, a fine doctor, and ultimately my husband," Miss Bain said, giving me a level look. "Isn't that remarkable?" I gazed at her, stunned. "So you see, Louise, people always act in their own best interest and are rarely what they seem," she said, smoothing the covers over her lap. "Every person has a beginning. Even those who would rather die than acknowledge it." She grimaced as a spasm of pain passed through her. "My husband has never spoken openly to me about the years before he came to us, and I'm quite sure it would destroy him if he discovered I knew of his unfortunate origin, so I would appreciate your discretion in this matter." "Of course," I stammered, as more alarming realizations came to mind. "Yes, I see I've given you a lot to think about." Her face was drawn, her smile tired, her gaze bleak. "I'd like to rest now, so please pull the shades and wake me in an hour," and then she closed her eyes and lay stiller than death while I did just that. Reeling, I went into my room, but all of a sudden the smell of the rot was too strong. It was everywhere in the house, and I opened my window, but I still couldn't stand it. Not along with what I just heard, and still couldn't believe, not with knowing that Miss Bain was dying, that she would die right there in that bed, and then what would happen to me? I wouldn't be needed here any more. Would be sent back to the home to rejoin the sick and grief-stricken. The crowded ward of teens that preyed on one another would become one of the faceless, unwanted surplus who just kept coming. The thought was unbearable. I pulled on a sweater and went outside, standing by the back door a moment, hugging myself and gulping in the fresh air. Peter came around the side of the house and stopped when he saw me. "Are you all right?" I turned away, wiping my eyes, and nodded. "I'm fine." "Why do you say that when it isn't true?" he said, touching my arm. "I don't know," I said helplessly. "I'm leaving," he said after a moment. "I haven't told the boss yet, but I'm quitting on Friday." "You're leaving?" I said, shocked. "Why?" He shrugged and looked out toward the road. "This isn't a good place for me." I don't think it's a good place for anybody. He met my gaze. I've already stayed longer than I meant to. And then there was an unspoken question in his dark gaze that lilted something inside me, and brought a strange weakness to my knees. Do you know where you're going? He shook his head. I'll find something, I always do. But to just go, to leave your home. This isn't my home, he said with a grim laugh. That was stolen years ago, and then he stopped abruptly and shook his head. Well, I said, feeling sadder than I should have, given that I hardly even knew him. I guess we'll miss you. I backed up a step. I should go back in now before anybody sees us talking, and besides, Miss Bain needs me. I reached for the door. If I don't see you again before you go, then good luck. Louise, he said. Have you ever thought about leaving here? Leave? No, I said. They're my foster family, and besides, where would I go? A door slammed at the back of the yard, and I immediately opened the door to disappear inside before Dr. Bame saw us. Wait, Peter said urgently. The workshop, have you ever been in there? Only once, way back in the beginning, I said, pausing. Why, have you? No, but he had me board the windows, and the smell around the place. He gazed at me as if trying to gauge how much to say, and when I gave a nervous look towards the back of the yard, expecting to see Dr. Bames striding toward me at any second, and hurriedly, You don't want to stay here, Louise. It's not a good... I have to go, I said, and quickly slipped inside, ran to the kitchen window, and watched as Peter turned and walked past Dr. Bame, who was muttering and rubbing his gloved hands together, and didn't even seem to notice him. Peter stopped and turned and met my gaze for a moment in the window, and then walked back over, picked up his rake, and continued to work. Gran, one more, I said, keeping my fingers crossed. It took a moment, but she blinked once. I woke up Miss Bame and brought her a tea tray. We were sitting together in silence when a loud blast startled both of us. She dropped her spoon and struggled to the edge of the bed, motioning for me to help her to the window. I did, and we looked out in time to see a scowling Peter striding over to where a deer, bony hips poking out through the sides and belly bulging, lay thrashing by the salt lick, and Dr. Bame hurrying down out of his tree stand, rifle in hand. That's a pregnant doe, I cried, covering my mouth and looking away sickened. He is consumed, she murmured, swaying in my arms, and still he denies himself. The poor fawn, I whispered, and then, in a surge of fury, It's not hunting season. Oh, how could he? Does are pregnant during hunting season too, Louise, she said quietly, without taking her gaze from her husband's raggedy, tottering figure. If they have mated in the fall, then they are pregnant when they're shot. She closed her eyes and rested her forehead against the glass. It is a man's right to destroy all he surveys. No, I wanted to say, no, it is not. But instead I just looked back out of the window, near tears, and saw Peter, grim hands clenched in his fists, watching as Dr. Bame knelt by the deer's body. The doctor said something, but Peter didn't move. Dr. Bame glanced up sharply and spoke again with angry, jerky movement. Peter bent and helped the doctor lift the doe's twitching body and place it on the cart. Dr. Bame commandeered alone and pushed doggedly toward the workshop. I helped Miss Bame back to bed and for the first time was unhappy at touching her, forcing myself not to shrink from the feel of her wasted muscles, hot under my hands, twitching and flexing like a pile of snakes. I wanted to leave the room, to leave the smell wafting from wherever she moved, to wash my hands over and over again, to plunge them into nurse's buckets of disinfectant. Come set my hair, Louise. Thaddeus will be proud of the kill, and may decide to visit me tonight, Miss Bame said breathlessly, grimacing at her reflection in the hand mirror and missing my astonished gaze. I would like to be beautiful for him when he does. So I sat for an hour winding her hair around rollers, and when we ran out of those, she showed me how to use strips of rags. While I was busy, she told me about the intimate moment 15 years ago that had changed their lives forever, the night of their 5th wedding anniversary, when desperate she had ceased to be a lady and had become a woman. I looked at Gran and her eyes were wide open, but I wasn't sure if she was actually seeing, so I got up and knelt in front of her, just far enough away to avoid her flailing feet. Can I keep going? I waited, but she didn't blink. Gran, one more chapter, and then I swear I'll go get the animal food ready, please. It took a moment, and finally her gaze found mine, and she blinked. How it ends. It was, Miss Bame said, the deck of racy playing cards she found in his bottom bureau drawer one day. When home alone, she decided to weed through their clothes for the annual charity drive. The deck had been hidden beneath a pile of old dress shirts. The cards were dog-eared and curved, as if shuffled often. The pictures of men and women together was shocking, and upon closer study answered many of the questions she'd had since her uneventful wedding night 5 years before. She went through them again and again and studied the women who were hard and cheap-looking, wore far too much makeup, and looked the way she'd always imagined prostitutes would. Feeling just a little sick and guilty, as if she'd been snooping on purpose, as if 5 years after the wedding and still a virgin, she wasn't getting just a little anxious, just a little desperate to find the key that would unlock her husband's stern, distant affection. So she had trumped up a reason and gone rummaging through his personal effects. She shuffled the cards one last time, studying the men, their naked backsides. They only showed the men from the back or the side, never the front, like the women, and their expressions that seemed to alternate between fierce concentration and a kind of dazed ecstasy. The more she looked, the stranger she began to feel, making her want not only to look at these couples, but to be one of them. She and Thaddeus, naked as the days they were born, a husband and wife without secrets or separateness, wrapped in each other's arms and marveling at what they'd been missing. Yes, this was what she wanted, now that she'd seen it, now that married love is more than twin beds, a movie screen kiss, and a fade to black. She replaced the cards exactly as she found them, shut the drawer, rose, left the room. She thought of the suggestive lingerie the women had been wearing, and without even pausing to run a brush through her hair or refresh her lipstick, she ran and caught the bus down into the city, where she did her best to replicate the peekaboo bras, only pink or black, no red, and the lacy black garters and panties. She thought of the hair the women in the cards went to the wig department, leaving with a long flowing Veronica Lake-style wig and a dazzling auburn, then head straight for the shoe department for a wicked pair of black platform high heels and ankle straps. From there, now slightly breathless, spurred by adrenaline and the images on the cards, she went to the liquor store, her first time ever inside of one, and bought our highest proof gin and several bottles of tonic, and then on the advice of the clerk stopped at the market for 2 fresh linen limes, 2 porterhouse steaks, 2 baking potatoes, and a fresh pouch of cherry pipe tobacco. She caught a bus home and lugged her bags, so many, up the block to their tidy little house, tried to think of which should come first, the drinks and seduction or the meal, and decided first the fresh tobacco, then the meal. Then, when he was nice and relaxed, she would make them, no, first a pre-dinner drink, a cocktail to relax him, then the tobacco, the steak, the post-dinner refill or 2, and the seduction. Yes, she felt giddy with excitement because she had a plan now. She was doing something daring and unapproved, and later, when they were snuggled close and it was over, she would tell him how she planned this, and he would lean back and smile and say, "That's my clever girl," and she would bask, oh yes, she would bask in the glow of his admiration, because she'd been waiting far too long to earn it. So when he came home, she did nothing to alert him, didn't reveal even the tiniest glimmer of the excitement shimmering inside of her. She had taken a bath earlier and pinned her hair up in secret preparation for the wig, but she was wearing a pair of slacks and a pullover, and she gave him her cheek to kiss like always, set him in to sit in his chair, and discovered his surprise fresh tobacco, and said, while he sounded genuinely pleased at the gift, "Oh, and I read that all the up-and-coming young doctors are having cocktails before dinners. So I made us each a nice gin and tonic here." And she carried his, which was twice as strong as hers, in as he put down the newspaper and thanked her for that too. By the time steaks were ready, he had finished the first drink and was absently sipping a second. She kept the conversation general during dinner, spoke of his many surgical triumphs, and the gin made him expansive, loosened him up enough to laugh and actually tease her, saying she looked 10 years younger with her hair up and dressed like that. She laughed along with him, and kept her distance, and when dinner was over, she casually poured them another round of drinks, his strong, her mostly tonic, because she felt looser too, and had to go easy or she would scare him away. "Madame," he said, leaning back and giving her an owlish look, "are you trying to take advantage of me?" Luckily, he missed her stricken look, and chuckling, hefted the glass and took a hearty swallow. "So tell me, my dear," he said, leaning back in his chair and smiling, "what else do brilliant, up-and-coming young physicians do? Vacation in Cuba? Learn how to ski? Put in swimming pools?" He drained the last of the glass, and still smiling, surrendered it for another. "Let's hear what the women's magazines have declared de rigueur for the cream of the medical community crop." "Better than that," she said, trembling as she motioned for him to follow her into the living room, and sat him in the center of the couch, taking careful note of his wobbly gait and flushed cheeks. "Stay there for a second and I'll show you." She handed him the drink and hurried to her bedroom, closing the door behind her. "Oh, let me guess," he called. "You bought a new dress." "No, a dress and shoes." "Wrong," she called with frantic gaiety, shimmying out of her clothes and struggling into the cut-out black bra, lace panties, and garter belt. The black stockings were the hardest, her hands were cold and clumsy, and it seemed to take forever to buckle the ankle straps on the shoes. "Keep guessing," she called, bending and pulling on the wig. "A dress, shoes, and a hat. I hope they're green, Margaret. You always look lovely in green." "Thank you, my dear. But that's not it," she called. "I know," he announced, his words distinctly slurred. "You bought a fur coat. What kind is it, Margaret?" "Don't be silly," she called back, dabbing cheap perfume everywhere, rolling on bright red lipstick, rimming her eyes with black pencil, and smearing rouge on her cheeks. She gazed at herself, astonished, almost sick with anticipation, because she looked like someone else, like a woman who knew things, knew how to excite a man, knew how to get everything she wanted, and so she turned on the phonograph and played the record album of boudoir music she'd bought, turned on the bed lamp she covered with a sheer black scarf, and "I know," he said, "it's a mink. You bought a mink, you little minx." She said a brief prayer took a deep breath, and shaking, opened the bedroom door and stepped out into the living room. No, she said, and didn't know whether it was the shoes with their sassy high heels, or the fact that she was nearly naked in the main room of their house, or the gin, or the deck of cards that had showed her what she was missing, or the fact that he was sitting there, mouth open, eyes wide, staring at her with a look she had never seen before, a riveted look that made her sashay straight over to him, lift the glass from his slack hand and straddle his lap. The ladies' magazines say that all you handsome, brilliant young physicians should always have your hands full after dinner, and when his fingers, cold and damp from the glass, crept up and gripped her thigh, when his breathing came heavy, she took his face between her hands and kissed him hard. He only said no once, tried to hold back once when he was propped above her on his knees, and shook his head as if to clear it, and said, "Margaret, no, I shouldn't, you don't know." "Do it," she said, pulling him closer, touching and stroking him, delirious, crazed by the powerful heat, yearning for this moment like none other ever, loving him with every cell, wanting him. And so he did, and she locked herself around him and watched his face, saw the fierceness, and discovered the second expression wasn't concentration at all, but need. Yes, need, because she needed him, and he her. And this was how they should be, laughing, tumbling, kissing, loving all the time. When it was over, he had collapsed, hot and sweaty, smelling of gin, and her new cheap perfume, gasping and mumbling and nuzzling her throat, her neck, when she whispered, "I love you," and he whispered it too, and fell asleep with his arms tight around her. Right before she fell asleep, when she was lying there drowsing in a beautiful dreamy haze, wondering at the miracle, hoping they had made a baby, her arm draped across his stomach and her hand settled at his hip, his fingers found a small scab-covered sore on his side, ran idly over it, and returned to nestle in his chest hair. She slept. When she woke up the next morning, he was already gone, and she spent the day in a delicious delirium, wondering what would happen when he got home. Would he sweep her up in his arms and carry her straight to the bedroom, or would they flirt with each other, prolonging the anticipation over dinner, and then fall into bed? Or maybe not bed at all. Maybe he'd ask her to dress up again, and they would use the couch this time instead of stumbling together into the bedroom like they had last night. Oh, it could be anything. Except that when he got home, he ignored her upturned mouth, went straight to the bottle of gin on the counter, and poured it down the sink. "I will not have any more alcohol in this house," he said, without looking at her. "I don't know what got into you last night, but if it happens again, which I promise you it won't, I will arrange for you to see a colleague of mine who specializes in female disorders." "What?" she'd whispered, hand at her throat. "Last night's tryst was tawdry," he said, still without looking at her. "You're the wife of a highly respected physician. You have a responsibility to remain above reproach." "Thaddeus, we're married," she cried. "What we did was between a husband and his wife. I cannot reason with you when you're like this," he said coldly, turning away. "Like what?" she cried. "Upset because for the first and only time in 5 years my husband made love to me, and now he won't even look at me?" "Lower your voice," he said, pausing in the doorway. "Thaddeus, please don't shut me out," she said, coming up behind him and touching his arm. "I love you." He stiffened but didn't pull away, and when he spoke his voice was stern but tired. "And I you, Margaret, but what happened last night cannot happen again." "Ever?" she said, voice cracking. He nodded once and went into the living room to smoke his pipe and wait for dinner. "And it hasn't, but Louise, my God, it just has to one more time before I die," Miss Bame said, blotting her eyes with a tissue. "It won't be the same, I know that, since his last operation. If only he would lie down beside me and hold me again, touch me, and I know I shouldn't say this to you, but there are other things a man and woman can do besides intercourse. It's true. I've read about them." I rose and went to the window, far too embarrassed by what she'd confessed to look at her. These were the most personal of moments, intimate interactions that no stranger should be privy to. I didn't know what to do except help her be beautiful and get Dr. Bame up into that room. "Arg," I buried my face in my hands. "This book is making me crazy. One more chapter?" I peeked out at Gran. Her eyes were closed. Sighing, I rose and turned off the CD player. "If we ever get through this book on tape and you get a chance to listen to it, trust me, you're not going to believe it," I said to my mother after supper, and then, trying to gauge her mood, said casually, "If Daddy only messed around with you once in like 18 years of marriage, would you still have stayed with him?" She stopped rinsing a plate and gave me a funny look. "Well, I guess it would depend on why." "Because he had syphilis?" I said brightly. "Because he what? The H kind of book is that anyway?" My mother said. "A very intense one," I said half to myself. I not at all what I thought it was going to be. "No serial killers or stuff wise?" My mother said. "Not so far," I said, retrieving the glasses from the table. "It's actually kind of sad. Women didn't have it so good in the olden days, did they?" "Are you asking me because you think I was there?" my mother said, eyebrows high. "No," I said, cracking up, and then my mother hijacked the conversation and took me back to her glory days, and we didn't get serious again. But I thought about Margaret Bame that night, doing everything she could do to win her husband's affection and attention, and I really didn't like the way it made me feel at all. It made me feel like I understood. I was helping Seth clean out his SUV because he finally found just the right classic MG online and needed to sell the SUV to buy it, and I found an earring, definitely not one of mine, under the back bench seat. It came out in a handful of McDonald's wrappers, which made it worse because we always went to Burger King. I stood there staring at it, a small hoop with 3 little blue beads, kind of bent, like it had been ripped from an ear, and he noticed my stillness and said, "What?" I held it up and said, "An earring, and it isn't mine." And he got all insulted and went to this rant, saying I'm so suspicious, what else does he have to do to show me that he loves me? And then I started feeling bad because he said it hurt every time I doubted him, and he hated being blamed for things he didn't do. He was getting loud, and that was embarrassing because we were out in front of his garage, so I was like, "Okay, forget it." And he said, "No, it's not okay," and then I started to cry because it was so cold and distant. So I went over to him and whispered, "I'm sorry, okay? I do trust you, and maybe the old owner left it, right? Maybe I jumped to conclusions." And he said, "Yeah, maybe you did." And then he put his arms around me and said, "You have to trust me, Hannah, okay?" And I was like, "Okay, I do, and I do. I don't know. Maybe it's me." I was settling the table for supper one night. My mother was making pasta salad, and I said really casually, "What would you do if Daddy ever cheated on you?" And I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't her easy. "Divorce him." "You would?" I said, shocked. "Just like that?" "Of course," she said, giving me a curious look. "Why? What did you think I would do?" "Well, I don't know, but not that," I said. "You would break up your family?" OMG, my mother hit the roof, and I was so not expecting it that I just stood there with my mouth hanging open. "I can't stand that you just said that," she said, grabbing a bottle of Italian dressing by the neck and shaking it like she was trying to kill it. "If your father cheated on me, then he made the decision to risk every single thing we had together, knowing that this would destroy us. So no, Hannah, it wouldn't be me breaking up the family, it would be him." "But you could forgive him," I said wearily. She snorted. "Why? Why would I want to live with a deliberate cheater and a liar and a betrayer, with someone who was willing to hurt me like that just to get off?" "Mom," I said, flushing. "No, I'm serious, Hannah. Why would I? Why would I think so little of myself to do that? And how could I even stand to look at him, not to mention touch him?" "No," she said, and twisted over the cap of the bottle. "We told each other way back in the beginning that we were several absolute relationship breakers, and topping the list was cheating. So we both know that if either one of us did it, it would really mean the end of everything." "Really?" I said, leaning back against the wall and watching her. "So that means if you cheated, Daddy would divorce you?" "Absolutely," she said with a brisk nod, "and I would expect him to." "Wow," I said, more than a little uneasy. "I never knew that. What about unconditional love?" She shook her head. "Think about what those words mean, Hannah, and then you tell me." "Unconditional love. Love without conditions." "Yeah?" I said, not getting it. "All right, suppose your father came in from work every night, screamed in my face, called me all sorts of vile names, beat the crap out of me in front of you, beat you too, brought home hookers, and did all sorts of disgusting things." "Ew, stop," I said, scowling. "Daddy's not like that." "Right, but if he was, if we had no conditions on our love, then I would still love and stay with him, right? Because with no conditions, then any behavior is acceptable. Then I would just take whatever I could get, right? Do you see what I'm saying?" "So there are conditions," I said. She sighed. "If you don't believe me, go ask your father." So I did, plopping down onto the ottoman in front of him and poking the newspaper until he sighed and lowered it. "Yes? What would you do if Mommy cheated on you?" I said. "Beat the crap out of the guy, then divorce her," he said matter-of-factly. "Do you believe in unconditional love?" I said. "Only for you, kiddo," he said. "Okay," I said. "Would you ever cheat on Mommy?" "No," he said with absolute certainty. "No roll in the hay is worth losing what I've got." And that made my eyes sting. And in a little kid move I hadn't done in I don't know how long, I reached over and hugged him, crushing the paper and making him grumble, but I knew it didn't matter because he smiled and hugged me back. It took me almost 2 hours of frantic digging through my catch-all drawer and the memory boxes in my closet, but I finally found the worn red talisman bag Granny made for me back when I was little, an acorn for growth and potential, mica because all that glitters is not gold, a piece of the catalpa tree for us together. I wanted to bring it to her, offer it up, and say, "See, I still have it, it still means something to me," but I was afraid she'd start crying and choke, so I just tucked it into my pocket and I went to sit with her and listen to the next chapter. How it ends. It would be an understatement to say it went badly. We waited, Miss Bame and I, from 7 o'clock as we heard him come in from his workshop until almost 10, with our curls drooping and makeup fading, making pitiful small talk, indulging in busy work, like cleaning off the other side of the bed just in case, and her lighting up every time there was so much as a creak in the hall. At 10, angry and unable to bear her sinking hopes and humiliation any more, I excused myself, went downstairs, found Dr. Bame in his study poring over a taxidermy manual, and said as politely as I could, "Excuse me, doctor, but could you come up and see Miss Bame? Please, it's important." "Is she hysterical?" he said without looking up. "No," I said, wanting to slap him. "Will you come, please?" "In a moment," he said. I waited knowing what would happen if I didn't, knowing he would either forget or willfully dismiss the request as if he had dismissed so many of her others. And when several moments had passed, I coughed. More moments, I cleared my throat. "Are you coming down with a cold, Louise?" he said finally, glancing up at me. "No," I said, holding his gaze. He heaved a sigh, closed the book, and rose. His gloves were stained with old blood, and his clothes were rumpled and putting off that same unpleasant odor, but I didn't dare make any mention of it, plus I knew Miss Bain wouldn't care. "Congratulations on the doe you killed today," I forced myself to say, and we made our way through the hall and up the stairs. "Very well. She wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, but I can still use her," she said cryptically, pausing outside his wife's bedroom door. I waited, watching as he hesitated, and then, when he finally drew a deep breath and turned the knob, I went on past my room next door, not to just listen, to be aware. I had just taken out fresh pajamas and unbuttoned my blouse when I heard voices rising, his harsh and hers wild. I went to the adjoining door and put my ear to it in time to hear him say, "You cannot keep doing this. I've done everything in my power to help you, Margaret. But it won't work if you don't try. Try for what? This horrible, sterile existence? Why would I want to live this way for another 30 years, Thaddeus? I'm dead to you already. You've all but buried me, and I won't do it, Margaret. I can't. I've had to live with what I've done for 18 years now, and so have I, Thaddeus. Don't you think I have to live with it, too? Don't you think I deserve some small happiness out of—" "I will not discuss this again," he said. "From now on, any request you make to see me must come through nurse to ensure it's for a valid medical emergency. Good night." "Thaddeus!" Her voice was flat. "I know." Silence. "Pardon me, Margaret?" "I know," she said, and her voice was rising again. "I know everything about you. I know about your mother, Margaret. And how my father found you. Please." His voice was wire-tight and shaking. "Don't." "I know it all, Thaddeus, so yes, I think you will spend some time with me, because I'm all you have. Do you see? I know everything, even how my father treated your mother. He eased her pain," he said automatically. "Oh, yes, he certainly did that," she said with a strangled laugh. "You're a physician, Thaddeus, deep in your heart of hearts. You know what he did to your mother. You know, and you just can't bear to acknowledge that your beloved mentor deliberately took her from you while you stood right there trusting him. Isn't that right? No, do not turn away from me. I know about your family and their disease, and even knowing everything, every ugly, filthy little detail, I still love you, and where are you going, Thaddeus?" I stepped away from my door right as hers clicked closed, and held my breath, praying he wasn't going to call me out and punish me for my part in this. Instead, his abrupt footsteps passed, and I heard the door to his room closed, and I heard Miss Bain weeping as though her heart was breaking, so I knocked tentatively on the connecting door and called softly, "May I come in?" The weeping didn't stop, didn't pause, so I eased open the door and hurried across the carpet to the bed, heedless of anything but the wrenching sound. "Shh," I said, perching on the edge of the bed and brushing her wet curls back from her face. "Everything will be fine." She just shook her head, hands over her face, shoulders shaking. "He's just surprised," I said, hating to make excuses for him, but the strength of her sobs was beginning to scare me. I did everything I could think of to ease her pain, rubbed her arms and stroked her hair and handed her tissues and shut off the overhead light and switched on the bedside lamp and wetted a washcloth and blotted her hot, streaked face. And when she finally opened her eyes in the dim light, her gaze was broken, disconnected, and feverish, scaring me even more. And when she took my hand in hers and whispered, "My heart is breaking, oh God, I feel it," and placed it over her breast, and I stiffened in shock and tried to pull away, she whispered, "No, don't," like she was carrying on a conversation with someone who wasn't there. I sat frozen as she whispered to herself and held my hand to her racing heartbeat and sweating. I prayed she would release me so I could go. What additional horror lay beneath the covers should never have been shown to me but in her delirium, and I must think of it as delirium or it will haunt me. She revealed the final operation meant to cure her unseemly desires, not a hysterectomy as I had been told, but a madman's artwork of amputation and stitching. The scar tissue shiny, tight, and streaked red, the genital mutilation bringing a panic so strong that I wrenched free of her grip and wiped frantically at my hands and my arms as if ridding myself of 1,000 insects, backed away, leaving her lying there, eyes closed, breathing heavy, breath heaving, sinking in on itself. I stumbled to the door and Dr. Bain was there, eyes unfocused, bloodshot and damp with tears, syringes in his bare, ungloved hands. He looked at me and said, "Go." And I went and I ran to my room, all while grabbing things. My Ciro's photo and for some reason a pair of bedroom slippers. I heard him say with infinite tenderness, "I'm going to administer something that will end the pain, Margaret, for both of us, and then I'm going to lie down beside you. Will you have me?" And her voice cracking with joy, "Yes, oh yes, please." Oh God, I ran down the stairs and out the door, and there was no one there. I saw a flashlight bobbing at the back of the property, and it was Peter. Saw him open the workshop and pause, and then slip inside, and a dip in light went on, and I took off running to him. I smelled the place yards before I reached it, and unable to call, ran inside, and skidded in slick, spreading puddle, skidded into Peter, who stood frozen. And I followed his gaze. The pregnant doe had been gutted and laid on her side on the table, her front legs parted in the fetal fawn laid in between them, her front legs broken to form human-like elbows, stitched up to encircle the mother's neck, had tilted up as if nuzzling her nose. A doe skin lay in a heap on the floor, buzzing with flies and leaking terrible fluids, and there amid a pile of partially chewed entrails, awash in chemicals, lay one last starving, shrinking, terrified fawn, hiding its face in the wet carcass, jerking to rise and falling sideways, cringing and thrashing, and I shrank back because its belly was eaten open and its intestines. "No," I whispered, and would have gone down had Peter not grabbed me and pushed me back toward the door. "Go," he said grimly, looking around the slaughterhouse and seizing a cinder block from the floor. "It's too late." "No," I sobbed. "Wait, we can take it." "Go," he shouted, voice cracking, and I went behind me. I heard a terrible thud, and then the cinder block fell, and he was beside me again, breathing hard and leading me across the yard and helping me into the front seat of his rattle-trap old truck, and I couldn't stop crying and patting my pocket for the Ciro's picture, but it was gone. I'd lost it somewhere, along with my bedroom slippers, and as we pulled out, I saw a nurse on her knees in a pale spill of porch light, disinfecting the cement lions blanking the front door, and she didn't even look up when we drove away. I sat there a moment, shuddering, then reached out and shut off the CD. Wiped my eyes, wiped Gran's eyes. Gave her a little Gatorade from her cup and wiped her nose. Went into the kitchen and stood looking at the pile of apples in the fridge. Took 6 out, hands shaking. Started slicing them for the deer. Hunting season started in a little more than 2 weeks. Seth wasn't in school today. I tried calling him 5 times, but he never answered his cell, so I finally gave up. It was hard not knowing if he was sick or if he just cut out. Harder still not to go to the office and see if Lacey McMullen was absent too, but I didn't. After school, I all but ran into Gran's, and it was funny how even with her so sick, being with her could still make me feel safe.